Our speaker today is one of our longtime members, Scott Turow. He is the author of 10 best-selling novels, Presumed Innocent, The Burden of Proof, Limitations, Innocent, Pleading Guilty, The Laws of Our Fathers, Personal Injuries, Reversible Errors, Ordinary Heroes, and Identical. And he's written nonfiction books including 1L, The Turbulent True Story of a First Year at Harvard Law School, and Ultimate Punishment, A Lawyer's Reflections in Dealing with the Death Penalty. Scott's also a partner at Chicago office of the law firm Dentons. And he's played rock music as a member of the Rock Bottom Remainders, a band featuring other well-known scribes like Dave Barry, Stephen King, and Amy Tan. And Scott served as president of the Authors Guild, using that role to champion the rights of authors. In 2013, the New City newspaper put Scott in the #1 spot on its list of Chicago's important literary figures. New City said Scott Turow is, quote, using his lofty profile to wage war on issues more important to the culture at large than to his personal well-being. And that is essentially why we've asked you to come here and speak tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, Scott Turow.
Well, I thank Robert for the nice introduction, and I also have to thank him. In addition, I had agreed to a different date originally, and some family business came up, and I had to pull the rug out from under him, and he was very gracious, so thank you for that, too. So I'm going to talk about the problems of authors in the digital age, and I started out with an acute problem of an author in the digital age, which is that I had prepared my remarks on my iPad, and I discovered back in the green room that there was no internet connection, and ergo my notes were not accessible, which, you know, just kind of goes to show you. When I talk about this subject, I sometimes end up being a downer. And I should say to start that books will always exist, readers will always exist, text will always be a favored medium for communication of ideas. And there are, of course, enormously beneficial things that the internet and the internet age has brought us. The prospect of the Google library, which, you know, who knows where and when it will be fulfilled. But, you know, the idea of a kid in China being able to have access to all of the great books of the world is, you know, an exciting idea. And I'm sure it will happen eventually. Ebooks, which I'm sometimes accused of being a stark enemy of, and that is not true. I am not an enemy of ebooks. I am an enemy of Amazon. But you know, ebooks are great. They spur book sales because they eliminate virtually all of the barriers. You don't have to go to the bookstore, even though I love bookstores. You can get almost immediate gratification. The book can be with you in seconds. So those are good things. And the digital age has also allowed authors who previously had to languish in the dungeon of being unpublished to reach an audience. And I think that is great. Some of them have exceeded expectations in terms of their success. Some of them have not, but at least they've had a chance, and I smile on that. But the reality is that authors' income streams are being rapidly depleted in the digital era, and basically the digital revolution has sort of set off a free-for-all in which virtually every player seems to think that they can enhance their economic position at the expense of authors. This is traditional publishers, this is search engines, this even includes libraries, it includes book pirates, and to some extent other writers, all of whom are trying, as I said, to enhance their own position at the expense of authors. And I don't know how much of this I'll plow through before the looks of boredom creep onto your faces, and I will open things up for questions. But so let me say to start, I see 6 major threats. The first is book piracy, specifically ebook piracy. The second is that ebooks are game changers in some way, and they have set off a not terribly fair fight between authors and their publishers, in which publishers, which admittedly have not been on robust times, have tried to lower the amount that they pay authors, and they've sort of done it in a de facto way. Third thing that really bothers me, and it's more subtle and it's not often recognized, is that the vision of the Constitution was that there would be an intellectual property rights holder called an author, and that author would be given a limited monopoly over the rights to his or her work, and would go to the public, and from the reading public, that author would gain support. Not the government, not patrons of the arts, not universities, not, big megacorporations. What has happened in this era, though, is that between the author and the reader stand not simply his publisher or her publisher, to whom the author traditionally made a grant of rights, but people with other intellectual property, specifically the people who have invented the Kindle or the iPad or the Google search instrument, and they are using that leverage to exercise domination over authors and increasingly publishers. Amazon is engaged in an all-out effort to put traditional publishing in the graveyard, just as they basically already done with bookstores. The power of these IP corporations, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, is enormous, and it becomes intensified because of the way our political system operates. They are rich, really, really rich, and we have a political system that depends on campaign contributions. And so these companies have enormous influence in the halls of Congress, which they are starting to use to shape the intellectual property laws for their benefit. And that is not necessarily for the benefit of authors, for whom there aren't many professions expressly mentioned in the Constitution. Authors and inventors are 2 of a very small group. I think farmers are also explicitly mentioned. So the idea that mega corporations are shaping the laws for their benefit really flies in the face of some of the founding vision in this country. With that, with the muscle of money, of course, these corporate behemoths are trying to trash authors' rights, sometimes just by directly grabbing them. I'll talk about Google Books in a minute. Finally, there is a threat that I never would have predicted, which it comes from what is sometimes referred to in the Authors Guild as the copyleft, that wants to basically diminish or altogether abolish copyright and make books available on an open access model on a vast digital library. I will never oppose any author's right to give away her or his work if that is what she or he decides they want to do. But the problem is that these authors who want to give away their works for what are actually very selfish reasons, that they are trying to impose that model on everybody else. And finally, and I have to say somewhat shockingly, the libraries and authors, some librarians and some authors organizations, including the Guild, are occasionally at war with each other in a way that I never would have been able to predict years ago. I really think the tension between authors and libraries, quite frankly, is the least of it, and so I mention it at the end. All of these problems really do not hit very hard at those of us who are fortunate enough to refer to ourselves as best-selling authors. The truth of the matter is that virtually all of the changes that have taken place in the publishing and book-selling industry since I first started out in 1977, when book discounting was virtually unknown, all of those changes have benefited best-selling authors. And you know, I'm richly aware of that and very grateful. But since I spent a long period of time being an unpublished author, I am always concerned about what is happening to my colleagues. And the people who are, you know, mid-list authors, people who are just starting out, those are the people who are most greatly disadvantaged by the changes that I am talking about. Because of things like Amazon's war with Hachette, we tend to ignore the fact that the traditional publishers have also behaved badly. And I never miss the opportunity when I am talking to publishers, including my own, to point this out. Ebooks are much less expensive for publishers to produce. There's no paper, there's no printing, there's no warehousing, there's no distribution cost. And the big deal, which all of us understand, is that there is no risk that an ebook is going to be returned. When you sell an ebook to a reader, that's it. It's a final sale. It's not like the bookstore system, where you used to ship books to the bookstore, and God willing, we will continue to do so for a long time to come. And the bookstore can't sell the books. They send them back to the publisher for full credit. Ebooks don't create that problem for the publisher. But instead of being more generous to authors, the publishers all have rigidly insisted on clauses limiting ebook royalties to 25% of the net receipts. Now, when you do the arithmetic on this, it turns out that there's been a de facto cut to authors' share of the proceeds of 50%. A 15% royalty on a hardcover book amounts to about 50% of what the publisher will net on that book. So reducing from 50 to 25% of the net has fattened the bottom lines of publishers. Some of them, HarperCollins for one, have actually been arrogant enough to brag about this in their report to stockholders. And this cannot go on. It is unfair to authors. And it's particularly unfair because of the pricing of ebooks, which is largely a result of Amazon, which pits the ebook, a lower cost item, in competition with the hardcover book. And the author, of course, makes a 50% of the net royalty on the hardcover, but only 25% on the ebook. And that is simply unnecessary. When publishers talk about this privately, they all acknowledge that. They all realize that this can't go on. The problem, of course, is that they're not making a lot of money, at least some of the publishing houses, some of the major houses, and so they've got to figure out where it's going to come from. And basically, they're going to have to figure out how to pay other authors less. And that's somewhat difficult, frankly, at the top end where there's competition between publishers as to who's going to publish best-selling authors. And that ends up bidding up the prices and leads to the problem of unearned advances. But so frankly, in order to remedy this problem, it's going to have to come to some extent out of the hide of the people at the upper end of the income scale. And that's what I will expect to happen over the next several years. Right now, of course, publishers are busy engaged in all kinds of cost cutting to try to pad their bottom lines. One of my favorite jokes about publishing refers to it as a 19th century business dragged kicking and screaming into the 20th century 100 years too late. It is easy to make fun of publishers, and I do it all the time. And they, generally speaking, end up behind the curve on most of their business decisions. And you can, as I said, make a lot of jokes at their expense, and that's appropriate. But one of the reasons that publishers are not usually the best business people of their era is because they value books. And they have gone into the publishing business not simply to enrich the bottom line, but to have something to do with the transmission of culture throughout a society and to another generation. And I always try to bear that in mind. But one of the ways publishers are now trying to increase the bottom line is to provide less service as you go down the list. So authors at the bottom of the list get virtually no editorial support, virtually no marketing support. And of course, the joke is that what does this do? It pushes those authors into the hands of Amazon and their self-publishing scheme. Amazon, because it compresses the role of publisher and bookseller into one, and because it pays no advances to authors as a general matter, certainly not to self-publish authors, Amazon's able to make a big buck out of the work of self-published authors. Because even if a self-published author, even if there are thousands of self-published authors who are selling only a few hundred copies of their books, that's several 100,000 copies for Amazon, and they get, they get 30% of that. So publishing is to some extent cannibalizing itself and enriching Amazon, which is pretty ironic. But there are also, of course, many ebooks being downloaded on which authors do not make a 25% of the net royalty. They make nothing at all because these books are being pirated. There are, as many of the people here understand, offshore sites beyond the reach of American law where the encryption on ebooks is quickly stripped out, and those books will be sold to people who go to Pirate Bay or numerous other sites at no cost at all, because those sites are supported in large measure by advertisers, pornographers, of course, being large among them. There are too many Americans, especially young ones, who seem to believe that if it's on the internet, it belongs to everybody. This is at the same time that they pay for cable. But the pirates, frankly, as contemptible as they are, would be a limited menace were it not for the search engines. And the search engines freely point people to these pirate sites. You put in, the last time I put in free Scott Turow ebook, there were let's see, 6 of the 10 out of the first 10 results were pirate sites on Yahoo, 8 of the first 8 on Bing, and 6 of the first 10 on Google. And they were all, the search engines were all pointing people to pirate sites. So you gotta be illegal, right? If somebody was standing on a street corner and asking, if I was asking, like, where do I buy heroin? There's somebody standing at the street corner, and they were routinely saying, well, you go down the block to the house over there. That, of course, would be a crime. And the person standing on the street corner doing that, particularly if he or she were profiting, would go to the penitentiary. But there is a so-called safe harbor provision in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which allows the search engines to pass people on knowingly to pirate sites and with no penalty to them, even as these search engines sail under the flag of a motto like, don't be evil. And it's certainly not true that they're not doing evil in that instance. Google, the don't be evil people, of course, were already in bad odor in parts of the literary community, certainly with me, because late in 2004, they decided to scan and digitize the contents of 7 major university libraries in this country, about 20 million books. As to 13 million of those books, I think it's a great idea, because 13 million of those books are no longer in copyright. And God bless Google for making those books available to readers around the world. 7 million of those books, at least in 2004, were still within copyright. And Google decided, notwithstanding the fact that they were in copyright, that they would display to users who searched within these Google books snippets from the book, usually around 250 words. Now, and Google says, well, you know, that's a fair use. I'm not showing the whole book to that person, which is true, but Google, of course, is using the entire book, and it is making money every time somebody comes to its site to do that. And it is making money that it does not share with either the author or the publisher. You know, I could not understand how this could possibly be legal. And this goes to show you what kind of an intellectual property lawyer I am. Because the courts, so far, at least in the Second Circuit, they have so far agreed with Google. Now, this is a story that is yet to be told. If the U.S. Supreme Court agrees to review this case, and clearly, no matter who wins in the Second Circuit, the losing party is going to ask the Supreme Court to do that. You know, I'm the guy who guessed wrong last time, but I still think that the Supreme Court is unlikely to find that a commercial entity can make money using an author's work without the author's permission. Call me old-fashioned, but we will see what happens. The problem with the Google Books project is sort of illustrated by something that happened with a consortium of university libraries called the Hottie Trust. 2011, the Hottie Trust announced that it was going to make available for free copyrighted works that it had decided were orphans, meaning they could not find, supposedly find, the people who controlled the rights. Now, of course, once they announced that, you know, the guild swung into action, and it turned out that there were, you know, works by, you know, James Gould Cousins, who was a major best-selling author of the 1930s and 40s, who had actually left his copyrights to Harvard. Walter Lippmann, they said Walter Lippmann had, you know, left orphan works. A guy named J.R. Salamanca, best-selling author of the 1950s. One of Elvis's movies was based on a Salamanca novel. And Turned out that Salamanca had signed an ebook contract the week before that Hottie Trust declared his work to be orphaned. So the University of Michigan Library that had started this program backed down from it, and once they got sued, and I'm fairly confident that they're not going to try it again. They realized that they waded into a polluted stream. But it goes to illustrate the kind of misuse that can be made out of these scans, which are still sitting in the hands of the university libraries. The biggest threat, of course, is that, if somebody can hack the Department of Defense website, how hard do you think it's going to be to hack the University of Michigan website? With that, to release into the world for free use 7 million copyrighted works, and therefore terminate the income stream of the authors who wrote those books. And again, it's just not the way we were supposed to be running the railroad. You don't have a copyright forever, and you shouldn't, if you ask me. At some point, copyright ought to expire and a work ought to pass into public domain so that it can be handed down between the generations. But the fact that there are all of these efforts to sort of curtail copyright by university libraries and Google is obviously of concern. I mentioned the Copyleft before, and I mentioned that these folks drive me crazy. Academic publishing has dried up for all but a very few authors as a source of income. And so since the copyrights of academic authors are in most cases not intrinsically valuable to academic authors, a lot of them find copyright to be more of a pain than a reward. And so increasingly they have sailed under the flag that says information wants to be free, and they think that copyright ought to be vastly limited, because if you're somebody doing scholarly research, the copyrights are often an obstruction to your research because you've got to get permission to quote from copyrighted works. So they want to get rid of it, and what really frankly frosts me about this is academic authors don't support themselves through their writing. They support themselves through the patronage of a university. And of course, the more broadly they can disseminate their work, the more often they're quoted and cited, the better it is for their academic career. So even though they want to destroy other authors' ways of making a living, it is actually will enhance theirs, will enhance their living and their standing in the academic community. And as I said, it irritates me. It irritates me a lot. And again, I don't care. Give it away. That's what you want to do. Put it up for free on the university website, your website. That's your right. And in some cases, that's really the right thing to do. But don't impose that regime on everybody else. And as I said, unexpectedly, there's even war between authors and libraries over the issue of remote lending. And, I would not be standing here were it not for the Chicago Public Library. My mother took me once a week to the Rogers Park branch on California Avenue. And my love of books was cultivated not only in my home by my mom and my dad, but also by the Chicago Public Library. And I don't know many authors who don't treasure libraries. But I always try to remind people that in the midst of our capitalist society, libraries are really communist enterprises. They say, here is property, intellectual property, and we're going to make it available to everybody for free. And frankly, I think that's great. It's fine with me. But you can imagine how General Motors and Toyota would react if we announced that there is going to be a municipal motor pool where they're going to buy cars and everybody in Chicago can come and use them for 3 weeks at a time. and not have to pay for it. And we're all so accustomed to our library system that we never step back to think how out of keeping it is with the way the sort of relentless capitalism that dominates most other transactions in this society. Again, it's fine with me, but the issue of remote lending has ended up pitting the publishers and authors against the libraries because, you know, you used to come into the library, you get your communistic use of a book for 3 weeks for free, but you had to go to the library. I mean, there was some barrier to doing that. You know, you had to wade out into the snow. Well, now libraries want to be able to lend books remotely. And in other words, you can sit at your computer and the library will lend you a book. It'll appear on your device, and about the only downside of that as compared to buying the book is that after 3 weeks it will disappear from your device. And you know, this is, I understand, I really do understand that libraries want to be relevant. Librarians believe in the dissemination of information, and that's obviously a noble goal. But the accommodation of remote lending, because it poses such a threat to publishers, and because it poses a threat to publishers to authors, has been a continuing issue. Last, and then I will open the floor to questions, is Darth Vader itself, Amazon. And even though most of the people who are sitting here are really card-carrying members of the literary community, most of you write, all of you read, people are not really aware of how vast and dominant this company has already become. Amazon sells more than 1 out of every 2 books that is bought in this country. And people don't understand that. They sell 67% of the ebooks that are bought from traditional publishers. And that does not count the increasing market for self-published authors, which is basically Amazon's alone, and which may be as large as 25% of the ebook market that goes uncounted. I think that's probably a pretty good number. They sell 64% of the physical books that are bought online. They are the audiobook market. They own Audible.com, the largest producer of downloadable audiobooks. And if that weren't enough, they also own Brilliance Audio, which makes audiobooks on CDs. They own AB eBooks, the largest seller of rare and used books in this country. They bought the largest print-on-demand company, Bookstores, several years ago. They have now rolled it into their self-publishing unit called CreateSpace, which dominates that market because you can't get access to Amazon without it. And in combination with the size of Amazon, and you can imagine, how would it be if we had only 1 movie studio, 1 record company? You know, people would be deeply alarmed by this. 1 television network, selling more than half the product in those industries. But on top of it all, they're ruthless. They are ruthless, and they have used the sort of blind patronage of Wall Street, which I think is pretty clearly rooted to an expectation eventually of monopoly profits. They have used that patronage to club competitors into extinction. So the story of the arrival of the ebook is one of them. Amazon didn't invent ebooks. I signed my first digital book contract in 1993. what they did that was innovative wasn't the device, but going to publishers in, I think it was 2005, and saying, you know, this market doesn't work because books come out and they're not available digitally. But if you would make books available digitally, we would be able to sell them, we think. And the publishers go, well, why in the world would I release a competing edition and undercut my sales of my hardcover? To which Amazon said, oh, well, we'll pay you the same thing we pay you for the hardcover, which was roughly 50% of the hardcover price. So publishers go, well, okay, you know, they sell a whole lot of books. We really don't like to make them mad because they're very, very nasty. So, okay, we're going to agree to this regime. Never did it cross their minds that Amazon paying $13, $14, $15 for an ebook would turn around and sell it for $10. But that's exactly what they did on front list titles. Now, what was the point of that? People say, oh, they wanted to sell Kindles. Nonsense. You want to sell Kindles, reduce the price of the Kindle. What they did by selling at a loss was they prevented anybody else from entering the ebook space. They made sure that companies like Sony, which made an e-reader, couldn't vie with them for the opportunity to sell ebooks. They put downward pressure on the cost of physical books by doing this. They said a book isn't worth $14.99, it's worth $9.99. And they tried to draw people, therefore, into the ebook market that way, all to the great damage, of course, of bookstores, which were already limping. And one of the things that most aggravates me about this, about the model of lose $3, $4, $5 till you've put everybody else out of business, is that the logical place to buy an ebook, or at least one of the most logical places, is in a bookstore. You go to a bookstore, you thumb through the book, you say, I really want to read this book, but I'm going to be traveling, can I download it instead? And the bookstore owner says, great, sure, I have the technology right here. Give me your device, here's the book, you know, enjoy your plane ride. But bookstores which were already limping from book discounting could not possibly enter a market where they were going to lose $3, $4, or $5 every time they engaged in a sale. Barnes & Noble, realizing that they were going to be out of business if they didn't follow Amazon's example, invested hugely in the Nook, and it's no secret that it's not going very well for them. But this is just one example of the sort of ruthlessly anti-competitive practices that Amazon engages in at the same time that they raise the flag of being the great free market champion, at the same time that they subvert the free market, pull buy buttons from the publishers who dare to disagree with them about business terms, and, you know, really employ bare knuckles tactics in millions of different ways. I could go on to the Hachette Amazon dispute that occupied most of last year, but I'll stop here. If somebody wants to ask me about it, I'll be happy to explain that one. Thank you all for listening. Yes, sir.
It seems that Amazon also is going into the movie business. I saw the Golden Globe, Jeffrey Tambor singing the praises of Amazon.
Right, right, right.
And without Jeff Bezos' name specifically, it wouldn't have happened, things like that. So it's spreading its reach to more and more media.
Right.
As you're saying.
Right. I can be critical of Amazon, and you've just heard me be critical of Amazon. Sure. Did everybody understand that? The questioner was making a point about Transparent, which was richly rewarded at the Golden Globes. This is Jeff Tambor's performance as a transgendered person. You know, it's a apparently a great show. I haven't seen it, but I've known Tambor for a while, and he's a great actor. And you know, this is an Amazon production. So I believe is the one about the congressmen who are all living in the same house in D.C. You know, based on Dick Durbin's living arrangements with 3 other Democrats. And that actually it has Chicago roots because Jonathan Alter, a Chicago boy, is the guy who thought up that idea. Yeah, they don't want to be at the mercy of the media companies, so they want to produce their own content. You know, I freely admit that I too am a Prime member, and those boxes from Amazon arrive at my house just like everybody else's house. But I don't buy books from Amazon. That is where I draw the line. Because they have a lot more competition selling underpants and toilet paper than they do in the book market, where, as I pointed out, they have gradually put the bookstores out of business. They are well on the way to putting Barnes & Noble on the ropes. Apple, of course, has got the deep pockets to compare with them, but they don't, to compete with them, but they don't sell physical books. You know, they pretty much have the field to their own. And I do think the day is coming with Amazon pretty soon, because Wall Street has finally stopped supporting Bezos. And how many people here, by the way, have ever looked at Jeff Bezos and thought of Lex Luthor? You know, yes, they want. He has taken every part of his operating revenue that he can and plowed it into expanding the business. And he's now facing a kind of Hobbesian choice, because if he stops doing that, he is going to clear the field for, he's finally got a real competitor. And he knows it, even if most people don't, which is Alibaba. And they're going to want to expand just the same way as Amazon. So if he doesn't stop expanding, which I don't think he can now that Alibaba is so heavily capitalized, he's got only one other choice, because Wall Street, his share prices are down 25% from last year. So, and people on Wall Street are like, you've been in business 20 years, when the hell are you going to make a profit? And so in order to make a profit, he's got to cut expenses when he can, but he doesn't want to stop expansion, so he'll sock it to his vendors, a la Sam Walton, and he's got to raise prices. And in point of fact, they've already started raising prices. You know, Prime membership costs 25% more than it did last year. If you are looking for a book that you can't find anywhere else, there's no discount on that book at Amazon. That's the same price you used to pay at your bookstore, at your independent bookstore, except, of course, the independent bookstore isn't there anymore. So you don't have the choice you might have had 5 or 10 years ago. Yes, Amazon, Uber alles. What else can I say? So they're a frightening company. And if they were more benevolent and regarded themselves as members of a community, it would be easier to stomach. But they believe in, you know, this sort of creative destruction school of capitalism. And, you know, I think they're destroying culture along the way. Yes, sir. Right.
Because my publisher has been somewhat flexible and willing to negotiate, so would like to find out a way of getting good legal representation, because I see this attractive project going into different forms.
So the question is, where does an author get good legal representation? I'm so glad you asked that question. For the puny cost of $125 a year, you can join the Authors Guild. where you will receive legal advice on your contract and on contract negotiations and contract provisions. Obviously, if there's something that's too complex to be handled by a staff attorney, they will refer you to a good lawyer who will work at reasonable rates. But the first thing you ought to do is join the guild, because not only is it good for your contract negotiation, it's even better for your soul. So, yes, sir, behind you.
That might be the answer to the question I was going to ask, which is something very simple. I'm an academic publishing house author who retains his digital rights. And now it's, all right, fine, if I want to form a contract, an agreement that says, let's do an ebook or let's do something digital, where do I start? And so would that be something that would...
Well, you have the question is, where do I go with my ebook rights?
Yeah, which I have not yet explored.
Right. One answer is Jane Friedman's company, Open Road, where they won't pay you in advance, but they will give you the 50% royalty your publisher ought to be giving you on your ebook rights. You have to be sure, however, that your contract actually reserves the digital rights to you. And if it does, you're one of the lucky few who probably signed these contracts quite a while ago. Open Road would be my first suggestion. You know, there are plenty of other alternatives out there. I would try my best to stay away from Amazon and CreateSpace. But you may find that you have no access to the Amazon platform unless you play their game. So certainly with Open Road you will. There are a couple of other ebook publishers. The Guild has started a digitization project, but the fact of the matter is there are commercial avenues out there that really are just as good. I don't think we're going to go forward with it for that reason. It's an expense that the market, frankly, the market's managed to fill in where it wasn't, where it didn't exist a few years ago. Yes, sir.
Assume hypothetically we had some sort of reasonable Congress. Are there any legal changes you recommend?
Are there any changes I would recommend if I had willing ears in Congress? Yes. I think, as I've indicated, that the doctrine of fair use needs to be re-examined with an eye toward the digital world. So that's where I would start. Now, that may be just because Google has been such a burr under my saddle, and the idea of them making free use of whole books and not paying the authors really bothers me. So that's the first fix I would like to say, that, you know, see that fair use does not include the use by an entity of all or substantially all of a copyrighted work. To some extent, that's pretty narrow-minded on my part because it fixes just one problem. And we really need an embracing approach to the world that we have entered. And we need one, and I have, by the way, to take my hat off to our existing Register of Copyrights, Maria Palente, who is one of those people who really does have a broad view of copyright, who recognizes that books are special, that knowledge cannot be owned in perpetuity by anybody, something I agree with, and so that copyright needs to be limited, even though Walt Disney doesn't like to think so. They want Mickey Mouse to be under their proprietorship forever, even though Mr. Disney's been dead for quite some time now. I don't believe in unlimited copyright. But, you know, I'm not enough of an IP lawyer, and certainly not enough of an IP visionary, to stand here and give you a laundry list of the changes that I would like to see. I would like to see a thoughtful approach that considers the needs of the people who the Constitution thought of first, that is, the people who are creating intellectual property. And that doesn't mean those are the only needs. They have to be balanced against the needs of the members of the audience, readers when we're talking about books, viewers when we're talking about video. But those are the real people that the Constitution was concerned about, creators and the audience, and the hell with the companies and what's best for them. Yes, sir.
What would you suggest if you, say you're not having the luck here in the United States, and you would like to go the end around, like Clint Eastwood wasn't that he was actually career correct, but he
Right.
went to Italy and he started, and then came back, and in fact with a new interest. If you want to do that with an intellectual property, couldn't you run into a lot of international copyright problems?
The question is, let's say you're not having great success in the United States. Can you try foreign markets, and are there complex intellectual property problems that come along with it? Again, you know, I feel like these days when you get an email from a law firm, somewhere buried at the bottom is something like, you know, this isn't tax advice. It may look like tax advice, but it's not tax advice because we're not qualified to give you tax advice. I'm really not an IP lawyer. Obviously I've dabbled on the edges of it for a long time. Generally speaking, foreign markets can sometimes work for authors who have had no success or almost no success here. So it's not like that's a silly thought. The number one obstacle, of course, is that if you're going to look to a non-English speaking country, it's got to be translated. And if you happen to be fluent in that language, then I know a good translator, namely you. If you're not, that's the first barrier. But you know, the way to probably approach it is to find the names of foreign rights scouts in New York and get your book to those people, and they understand, you know, other markets. And what works in the United States or doesn't work in the U.S. Will sometimes be country dependent. There's an author named Noah Gordon who is not a household name in the United States, but man, has he been successful in Germany. So there are many, many examples of that. So I don't think it's a bad idea at all. Yes, ma'am.
So far, it seems like the discussion is focused a lot on readers and viewers. I'm not exactly certain how to frame the question. There is certainly a lot of nuance involved, but in terms of the music, it seems like that's a little bit stickier. I know with certain examples of artists coming up in recording studios. Taylor Swift wanted to pull her album. If you could speak to that, possibly in the context of digital rights.
Right. The question is about the music industry, the problems there, issues of digital rights. If you're the head of an author's organization, as I was, and you have a nightmare about it, when you wake up, you realize you were dreaming about the music industry. The piracy of music online through, you know, Napster and Grokster and all the file sharing devices that arose literally killed careers across the country. I did a presentation last year in Washington with Kim Carnes, who's the head of the Songwriters Association, and I'm sure he measures his own membership. He says there are 28% fewer professional songwriters in the United States now than there were 10 years ago, because people can't make a living at it, because what they write gets stolen. That's problem number one. You got to avoid the thieves. and that's still a problem. And it's obviously it's an industry in which the pirates you don't know may be only marginally worse than the pirates you do, referring to record labels. You know, there have been, Roger McGuinn is a friend of mine, and Roger, several years ago, just said, it's not like he doesn't record for a label at all, but most of his music production he does on his own and sells off his own website. And if you're Roger McGuinn, and if you were a member of the Byrds, and if you're the greatest 12-string guitar player of your generation, that can work for you. If you're unknown, obviously it's more difficult. You know, there's still a role for the curatorship of publishers and record labels. But it's, you know, it's a difficult world. There's just no way to pretend that that's not true. The only thing that musicians have had going for them that authors do not is that while recording has been basically devastated as a business by piracy, the musicians have tended to make up for it by performing. Now, it doesn't mean performing is a great way to make a living for any but the best-known artists. I heard Amy Mann talking about this last year on Fresh Air, and she was at the end of a nationwide tour, and you know, I think of her as a great performer, but she was saying that she was going to be lucky to be able to pay the costs of her tour. So that doesn't mean it works for everybody. And, you know, overall, all of these areas of artistic endeavor are beset by the same problem that we have in the society as a whole, which is namely it's a winner-take-all proposition. Certain people break out and make huge, you know, rewards. I am lucky enough to have been one of them. And as I said, it never leaves me that, you know, I was 38 years old and had written 4 unpublished novels when Presumed Innocent hit the big time. And I often think, right time, right place, what would have happened to me if I weren't in the right place at the right time. So I'm concerned about maintaining the vision that I think, you know, the Constitution had, which is more authors, more voices, more expression, and, you know, lower the barriers to finding an audience, give authors support. But it's music, that's a hard world. Yes, sir. What do I think about Lulu and Verve? Blurb, I don't know that much about. For the gentleman who asked before about what to do with his ebook rights, I think Lulu is an interesting alternative. So there are a lot of companies out there trying to enter this space, and again, I just can't. Amazon has done a great job for many self-published authors. You have to bear in mind that they are making money by depriving authors of what publishers have traditionally based their sponsorship of authors on, namely by giving them an advance. But because of the way I detest Amazon's methods of doing business, I can't encourage anybody to look at Amazon. And so a company like Lulu is a really neat alternative, as far as I'm concerned. Yes, sir.
Will high schools continue to use real books, or will they change?
Will high schools continue to use real books, or will that discontinue? Again, not an educator. If you're going to use ebooks to replace real books, then you have to provide devices to students on which those ebooks can be read. Now, they're getting pretty cheap, and that may be a possibility, but what do you do when the kid leaves school and sells his or her e-reader on the street, which is likely to happen in every school I know of? So there's not such a ready market for your math book, but there's a pretty good market for your e-reader, which, you know, you can use to read porn and, you know, spy stories and even my books. So, so that's the barrier there. On the other hand, I know school systems are probably going to try to figure this out because, of course, the ebook is cheaper, at least if it really reflects its cost. Textbook markets are traditionally non-competitive markets where the publishers like to lock in school districts and then charge them, you know, outrageous amounts of money for textbooks. So presumably you could do the same thing with ebooks, which wouldn't be any better. But I assume the cost of ebooks to school districts will be lower. And if so, I think there will be a momentum in favor of that. Yes, sir? The courts broke up AT&T. Can they do that with Amazon? Well, Amazon has been unbelievably successful so far in avoiding antitrust prosecution. In point of fact, there was sort of a merger in antitrust theory after the Reagan administration, which both Democrats and Republicans seem to like, which says that you measure anti-competitive effects simply by their effect on consumers. So as long as Amazon is reducing prices, even as it's destroying competition, they have so far avoided getting in trouble with the FTC or the Antitrust Division of the Justice Department. Now, the Apple ebook price fixing case was argued 3 weeks ago in front of the Second Circuit. And Judge Jacobs sort of held up his hand and said, "What are you talking about? There was a monopoly here. Amazon is a monopoly, and they were engaged in predatory pricing." And I'm sure the people from the government had absolutely nothing to say. As it was reported, the second of the judges out of the three seemed to be nodding along with him. So things may be about to change. One of the realities of antitrust law, of course, is that, going back to the times that the mind of man runneth not to the contrary, if you picked up a rock and for no reason hit your brother over the head, it was wrong, and it's still wrong today. But antitrust law is really a whim of economic theory and notions of public policy. The conduct that Amazon has engaged in, the predatory pricing by which they sold ebooks, the starting of a publishing house of their own, which hasn't been real successful because bookstores won't carry their books, but they do pretty well on their own website. Those things were illegal when I went to law school. And it's quite possible that Amazon will push far enough that somebody will hold up a hand and go, the law could not possibly mean to countenance destroying all your competition because Wall Street, for whatever crazy reason, decides to capitalize you at insane levels, even though you don't make a profit. $400 a share and no profit? I mean, really? So, and that, as far as I'm concerned, is a special circumstance. If you have unlimited capital, you really are damaging the competitive infrastructure so that when you engage in your anti-competitive behavior that the law does recognize, namely raising prices to unconscionable levels, When you do that, there's, Humpty Dumpty can't be put, all the king's horses and all the king's men. Can't put it back together. And that's what I think the flaw is in current antitrust thinking. And I've had conversations about this with the people in the Justice Department, and they wave their hands and say, well, if Amazon does that, someone else will emerge. And they're not considering things like the fact that Amazon bought Goodreads, which is an online reading community. Why did they buy it? Because it was the most obvious thing for a competitor to buy as an alternative venue to sell books and ebooks. So they went out and bought it first. We have to have, as far as I'm concerned, a theory of the market that says you can't destroy the competitive infrastructure. So anyway, yes, sir.
Yes, you remember that conscious parallelism is a dead issue, but it seems like all the publishers have gotten together and they will insist that a writer give them visual rights as well as the usual sort of publication rights. No antitrust possibilities there anymore?
Well, within the 25% ebook royalty is supported by clauses that say that the 25% is industry practice. If it ever changes, then the publishers will renegotiate. And that is little more than a way, as far as I am concerned, for the publishers to signal each other that you can't give more than 25%, because otherwise we're going to have to renegotiate every contract we've got. To be brutally honest, I had disagreements with some of my colleagues at the Authors Guild about whether, when we were complaining about Amazon's anti-competitive practices, we should have complained about the publishers as well. As far as I'm concerned, the Justice Department sued the publishers for the wrong thing. And had the Justice Department ultimately sued the publishers and Amazon at the same time, saying that there was anti-competitive practice throughout the sale and pricing of ebooks, I would have had no problem with that. But to select the publishers and let Amazon get away scot-free really bothered me. But yes, the conscious parallelism between the publishers, whether it's legal or illegal, is obvious. And I would say the one thing that the Department of Justice accomplished with the ebook suit is it scared the hell out of them. And they don't, one reason, talking about the Amazon Hachette dispute, that Amazon was able to claim untruthfully that the only issue in that dispute was the pricing of ebooks. It was really the division of profits between Hachette and Amazon, and the publishers and Amazon. And Amazon is trying to answer its Wall Street masters by cutting that expense. The reason that Amazon was allowed to get away with that, to claim it was just about ebook pricing, was because Hachette was scared to death about saying anything publicly for fear that the Justice Department would claim that they were signaling the other publishers about how to negotiate with Amazon. So maybe the conscious parallelism will be reduced in the future. Yes, ma'am. The question is a great one, which is how do we go about, being part of the solution? As I said, I personally do not buy ebooks from Amazon. I don't buy any books from Amazon. I think the only hope we have is to try to maintain that competitive infrastructure. I think we all have to be mindful of that. You know, whether that's going to be like using less hot water solving the problem of global warming, I don't know. But it makes me feel better. It really makes me feel that I am not deepening the plight of my fellow authors by allowing traditional publishers to be destroyed. You know, we'll see if I'm right about that. The other thing worth bearing in mind is that when you had immense bipartisan agreement in Congress about the need to deal with internet piracy of books and movies and music. And there was what I thought was an extremely reasonable proposal. And the bill had different names in the two houses of Congress. But for a while, it looked like something was actually going to happen, which was going to require the search engines to darken any site that was proven to be a pirate site after notice and an opportunity to be heard. It wasn't summary execution. Well, Google began screaming about government censorship, which generally speaking doesn't take place after a full-blown hearing. And then they organized this Black Wednesday where people, you know, they didn't know anything. They just accepted, you know, what they were being, the blather of Google. Somehow Wikipedia got involved. They flooded Congress with emails and scared every single member of Congress witless. And so I would say the other thing to do is respond, write, organize, make sure that your voice is heard as well. Because, as I said, there's a tremendous, I think the movie companies were shocked to find out that there was now someone in this economy who was more powerful than they were. But the search engines, the internet companies are. And, you know, they're not bad people. They're just capitalist enterprises. And they're out for themselves. And they wrap themselves in this cloak of being cool. And young people think, oh, they're cool. Without realizing that in many cases, they're selling their future to these folks. So I would say be active and speak out. There's a hand up in back. Are you telling me to stop, or are you asking a question? All right, we got two people speaking. I'm going to come to you next. There's a female who started speaking back there. I can't see you, ma'am, so I apologize for identifying you that way. Yes, Maria was the Associate General Counsel of the Authors Guild, that may be why she has as informed a pro-author view. I don't hear people from other industries, though, attack Maria as being unduly biased toward authors. And in point of fact, I think that the members of Congress have a great deal of respect for her. But you are absolutely correct that part of Maria's earlier professional life brought her to the Authors Guild, where she was beloved, I have to admit. That is the same person who is now the Register of Copyrights. So. All right, this will be the last question in back, sir. Thank you. You know, I'm so far from you, I couldn't hear what you were saying. And I know you don't have a microphone and you're in the last row. But can you try again? The question is, you know, how do we stay abreast of the activities of Amazon? Because people are usually staggered when I sit there and go through that list of everything they own and how thoroughly they have captured the book business and how thoroughly they control it, every aspect. And, you know, the answer, unfortunately, is you've got to stay alert and spend time looking at the various blogs about publishing. And, but, you know, one way to do it is every month or so put in the search term Amazon buys and see what turns up. I didn't even mention, you know, they've bought a number of children's book publishers. They've bought the rights to, you know, the James Bond novels out of the Ian Fleming estate. I mean, the list just goes on and on. And the idea of our culture, our literary culture being in the hands, under the control of one company is really frightening. You know, Jeff Bezos got into this dispute with Hachette, but the one book that he was willing to deliver to buyers in the same way he would always have delivered it and with the same discount was Paul Ryan's book. You know, so they're massive and they increasingly are exerting content control in terms of what they sell. So I'm all wound up about Amazon because I'm going to New York on Thursday to engage in one of these intelligence squared debates where the question is Amazon the reader's friend? And, you know, I think I would win here, but given the way Amazon does business, I suspect that Frank Foer, former editor of the New Republic, and I will probably end up getting our heads handed to us because I'm sure Amazon will pack the audience. But they're much too careful to, you know, not to take the opportunity to do that. So, but yeah, I've got Amazon on the mind, and there are certain days you can get me, and I'll be all wound up about Google instead. So, anyway, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it.